Picture this. You're sitting at your own family's dinner table, the same table where you learned to tie your shoes, where you blew out birthday candles, where you thought you were loved, and a man you've known for 6 weeks looks you dead in the eyes, smirks, and says in front of everyone, "So, Emily, still unemployed? What exactly do you do all day, Asar?" And then, the worst part, not a single person defends you. Not your mother, not your father, not your sister. Everyone just laughs. And then he picks up his fork and keeps eating, like he didn't just publicly execute my dignity at a dinner table I helped pay for. But here's what Randall didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't unemployed. I was the furthest thing from unemployed. And in exactly 47 days, every single person at that table was going to find out exactly who Emily really was. Stay with me, because this story doesn't end with a shouting match or a dramatic door slam. It ends with documents and signatures, and a phone call that made my sister cry in a way she never expected. The quietest revenge is the one they never see coming. As the story already has you feeling something, please subscribe before we go any further. Your support means everything to me, and it reminds me that I'm not alone in this. It reminds me that the people who were underestimated always find their people. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because you need to hear how this ends. My name is Emily. I'm 32 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan on the Upper West Side, 14 floors up, with a window that looks out over the park. I drink my coffee black. I wear blazers even on Sundays. I have 3 plants, all named after Supreme Court justices, and I talk to them when I'm thinking through a problem. From the outside, my life looks quiet, controlled, maybe even a little cold. But I wasn't always this way. There was a time when I was the warmest person in every room. That time ended the night Randall came to dinner. My family, the Holloways of Queens, New York, are the kind of family that looks perfect in Christmas photos and falls apart the moment someone achieves something. My mother, Layla, is a retired school teacher who spent my entire childhood comparing me to my younger sister, Holly, who was prettier, more social, more willing to perform happiness for an audience. My father, Stanley, is a good man, a quiet man, who learned decades ago that the path of least resistance in our household was silence. And then there's Holly, my sister. 2 years younger, effortlessly magnetic, the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately becomes the center of it. Growing up, I adored her. I covered for her when she snuck out. I helped her with her college applications. I lent her money I never asked back for. I loved Holly the way older sisters love the people they helped raise. And I believe somewhere under everything that happened, Holly loves me too. That's the part that made it so devastating. When Holly was 28, she dated a man named Liam who treated her terribly. I was the one who sat with her at 2 in the morning on the floor of her apartment in Brooklyn while she cried into a takeout container. I was the one who helped her pack his things. I was the one who held her hand through the whole awful aftermath. So when she called me 8 months ago, bright, giddy, practically singing into the phone, to tell me she'd met someone new, I was genuinely happy for her. "His name is Randall," she said. "Emily, he is everything." I asked the normal questions. "How old?" 38. "What does he do?" "Finance," she said. "Something about investments." "He drove a black Audi. He wore good watches. He knew how to order wine." "He sounds impressive," I told her. "He is," she said. "You're going to love him." I never loved him, not even close. The first time I met Randall was at a casual Sunday brunch at my parents' house in Queens, the kind of gathering my mother used as an audition stage more than an actual meal. She'd made her good dishes. She'd put out cloth napkins. She'd even bought flowers, which she only did for occasions she considered significant. Randall arrived with a bottle of wine and a handshake so firm it felt like a performance. He had the kind of smile that reminded me of men I'd encountered in boardrooms. Wide, practiced, designed to communicate confidence rather than warmth. He called my father Sir and complimented my mother's cooking before he'd even tasted it. My mother was smitten within 15 minutes. I watched from across the table, sipping my water, taking mental notes. Randall had the particular energy of a man who needed to be the most impressive person in any room he entered. He dominated the conversation. Stories about his apartment in Tribeca, a recent trip to Portugal, a dinner he'd attended where some unnamed person of importance had been seated next to him. Holly watched him talk with visible pride, like she'd brought a trophy to show and tell. I didn't say anything that first brunch. I smiled. I passed the bread. I listened. When my mother asked about my work, I gave my usual vague answer, consulting work mostly, and moved on. I'd learned long ago not to explain what I do to people who aren't listening anyway. But Randall noticed my deflection. I could see it in the slight tilt of his head, the narrowing of his eyes. Men like Randall file information away, they use it later. I drove home that afternoon with a strange feeling in my chest that I couldn't name. Not quite dread, more like recognition. I knew his type. I'd worked with his type. I'd dismantled his type. I just hadn't expected him at my family's dinner table. 6 weeks later, a Thursday in October. My mother called it a family dinner, which in the Holloway household is code for Holly is bringing Randall again, and everyone is expected to perform appropriately. I'd had a brutal week. I won't get into the details yet, those come later and they matter enormously, but suffice to say that by Thursday evening I was exhausted in the specific way that comes from carrying something large and important completely alone. I almost didn't go. I sat in my apartment for 20 minutes with my coat on, debating. But I thought of my father's face when not everyone showed up for dinner. I thought of Holly, who I still loved, who I was still trying to be fair to, so I took the subway to Queens. The table was set with the good dishes again. Randall was already there when I arrived, which meant he'd beaten me by enough time to already be pouring wine and making my mother laugh. Holly was in the kitchen helping, which meant she was deliberately giving Randall space to charm the room without her present to depend on. Clever girl, I thought. My father hugged me at the door. "You look tired," he said quietly. "I'm fine, Dad." "You always say that." "Because I'm always fine." He squeezed my shoulder in the way that meant, "I see you, even when no one else does." My father, Stanley, the quietest person in the family, has always been my truest ally. He never says much, but he notices everything. We sat down to dinner, my mother Layla at one end, my father Stanley at the other, Holly and Randall on one side of the table, me on the other. There was a moment, just before the food was passed, where everything felt normal, almost warm, almost like the family I used to believe we were. Then Randall started talking. It began small. He was telling a story about a colleague of his, a man named Julian apparently, who had never figured out how to monetize his skills. Randall told this story with the kind of casual cruelty that passes as humor in certain circles. My mother laughed. Holly smiled indulgently. Then he looked at me. "Speaking of which, Emily, right? What is it you do exactly? I feel like every time I ask, I get a different answer." The table went quiet. I set down my fork slowly. "I do consulting work," I said, "various projects." Randall tilted his head, performed confusion. "Consulting for what, exactly? What's the actual the job title, the company?" "I work independently." "Ah," he nodded, slowly, theatrically. "So, unemployed." And then he laughed. A single sharp, dismissive laugh that was expertly designed, to signal to the rest of the table that the correct response was to join him. My mother chuckled, eyes dropping to her plate. Holly looked away. My father went very still. "I mean, no offense," Randall continued, stabbing a piece of chicken. "It's just, Manhattan is expensive. I don't know how people survive without a real income. It must be challenging." The word challenging landed like a condescension, so heavy I could feel its weight on my shoulders. No one said anything. Not my mother, who I had helped financially 3 times in the last 4 years. Not Holly, whose Brooklyn apartment security deposit I had paid. Not my father, who I knew wanted to speak but was trapped, as he always was, under the weight of keeping the peace. Silence. Forks on plates. the sound of Randall taking a comfortable sip of wine. I looked around that table, I looked at my family, and something in me, something I'd been holding together with great effort for a very long time, went very, very quiet. Not broken, quiet. The way a room goes quiet right before a verdict is read. I finished my dinner. I thanked my mother. I hugged my father for a moment longer than usual. I said goodnight to Holly, who couldn't quite meet my eyes. I nodded at Randall, who gave me a magnanimous, pitying smile. I went home. I sat at my desk, the one that faces the park, where I do my most important thinking, and I opened my laptop. And I started making a list. I need to pause here and ask you something. If someone at your own family table made you feel invisible, made you feel like nothing, would you have stayed silent? Would you have fought back in the moment? Or would you have done what I did and played the long game? Before you answer, please subscribe. I read every comment. I see every one of you. And if you're watching this and you've ever been the one at the table that nobody defends, I need you to stay because what happens next is for you. Hit subscribe. You being here matters more than you know. AR. Let me tell you what I actually do. I am a restructuring consultant. Specifically, I work in corporate turnaround and acquisition advisory. What that means in plain language is this. When a company is in trouble, financially, structurally, legally, they call people like me. We come in, assess the damage, identify what can be saved, and either rebuild the company from the inside or recommend it for acquisition. I work alone because I prefer it that way. I charge more as an independent consultant than I ever did at the firm where I trained, a firm downtown in the financial district, 3 blocks from where Randall's company happened to be headquartered. I had been doing this work for 6 years. I had handled turnarounds for 17 companies. I had a waiting list. My name in certain circles carried weight. I never felt the need to advertise at family dinners in Queens. I am not unemployed. I am in fact one of the most employed people I know. I just don't have a boss to point to or a LinkedIn title that makes sense to people who've never had to save a company from collapse. The reason I'd always given vague answers at family dinners was simple. I didn't want to compete. I didn't go to those dinners to prove something. I went to see my father. I went because Holly was my sister. I went because somewhere in me there still lived the girl who believed family meant safety. Randall had just destroyed that belief very efficiently. But that wasn't the only thing Randall had done. And this is the part of the story where everything changes. Because 2 weeks before that dinner, 2 weeks before Randall sat at my family's table and called me unemployed, I had been hired. The client's name was Road Capital Group, a mid-size investment firm based in Midtown Manhattan, facing serious regulatory trouble and internal mismanagement that had brought them to the edge of collapse. The referral had come through my contact, Marcel, a man I'd worked with on 3 previous restructurings, who trusted my work absolutely. Road Capital Group had brought me in under a confidentiality agreement. I could not discuss the engagement publicly. I could not name the client. I could not describe the work. Which is exactly why when Randall asked what I did, I said, consulting work, various projects, are. It was not evasion, it was compliance with a legal agreement. But here's the thing about Road Capital Group that I hadn't fully registered, not yet, as I sat at that dinner table in Queens being laughed at. Road Capital Group's primary investor, the man who held majority stake in the firm, and who had ultimate authority over how the restructuring would proceed, was a man named Benjamin Holloway. Not a relative of mine. Different Holloways entirely. But Benjamin Holloway had a business partner, a co-investor, a man who'd been with him for 11 years in various joint ventures. That man's name was Randall Peter Voss. My sister's boyfriend. I didn't know this at the dinner. I found out 4 days later when the full due diligence documentation for Road Capital Group landed in my inbox, and I began working through the ownership structure. I stared at the name on my screen for a long time. Randall Peter Voss, minority stakeholder, Road Capital Group. And then, slowly, I began to understand exactly what kind of situation I was sitting inside of. I want to be very clear about something because it matters. I am not a vindictive person. I didn't sit at my desk the night after that dinner plotting Randall's destruction. That's not who I am, and it's not how I work. What happened over the following weeks was not engineered revenge. It was professional obligation, executed without compromise, which I discovered is sometimes the most devastating thing you can deliver to a person who's wronged you. When I found Randall's name in the Road Capital Group documents, my first call was to Marcel. I have a conflict of interest issue I need to disclose, I told him. Marcel, calm, methodical, a man who had seen every variety of corporate complication, listened as I explained the situation. A personal connection to a stakeholder, not direct family, not financial entanglement, but a connection. Is it the kind of connection that compromises your objectivity? He asked. I thought about it. I thought about Randall's smile over the dinner table, about the way my mother had laughed, about my sister looking away. No, I said, it does not compromise my objectivity. If anything, it clarifies it. Then document the disclosure and proceed, Marcel said, standard protocol. I documented it, I proceeded. What I found at Road Capital Group over the following 3 weeks was worse than I had initially assessed. The regulatory issues were significant. There was a pattern of misclassified assets and a series of internal reports that had been suppressed, specifically by a small group of people in the investment management division. The paper trail was not difficult to follow once you knew what you were looking at. Randall's fingerprints were not on the worst of it. I want to be clear about that too. He was not the primary architect of the mismanagement. He was a minority stakeholder who had, at several key junctures, received information he should have acted on and chose not to. In legal terms, that's called willful blindness. In practical terms, it meant that the restructuring recommendation I would be writing would not be favorable to his position. I worked, I documented, I verified everything 3 times. This was not personal. This was a report that had to be accurate above all else, because inaccurate reports in my field have consequences that follow you forever. My reputation was built on accuracy, on rigor, on the absolute absence of agenda. I had no agenda. I had findings. And findings don't care about feelings. During this period, Holly called me twice. The first time I didn't answer. I was in the middle of a document review and I needed to focus. The second time I picked up. Hey, she said. Her voice was soft in the way it gets when she knows she's done something and isn't ready to say it directly. I've been thinking about you. How are you? I'm well, I said. Busy. About dinner. Holly, it's fine. He was being exactly who he is, I said quietly. And so was everyone else. It's fine, I'm not upset, and I meant it. I genuinely wasn't upset anymore. I had moved past upset the moment I opened that due diligence file. Holly went quiet. You're never upset. That's not normal, Emily. Maybe not. How are things with you? She talked about Randall for 10 minutes. How thoughtful he was. How she'd never felt this way about anyone. How she thought this might be the one. I listened. I said the appropriate things. I didn't tell her what I knew, because legally I couldn't. I hung up the phone and went back to my documents. 47 days after the dinner in Queens, I submitted my restructuring recommendation for Road Capital Group. The report was 43 pages. It included a full financial analysis, a regulatory compliance review, a leadership assessment, and a section on stakeholder liability that named each individual with evidence whose decisions had contributed to the firm's current position. Randall's section was 9 pages. I am not going to claim that I felt nothing when I submitted that report. I'm human. There was a moment, just a moment, when I thought about that dinner table, about the sound of my mother's laugh, about Holly looking at her plate. And then I submitted the report, because it was correct, because it was accurate, because it was the job I had been hired to do and my reputation, the one I had built alone, quietly, without anyone's applause, demanded nothing less than completeness. The report went to Benjamin Holloway and his board first, per the engagement agreement. From there, per standard protocol and restructurings of this nature, it was shared with the regulatory body overseeing the compliance review. I was not present for any of those meetings. I don't attend the detonations. I just build the device and walk away. 3 days after submission, Marcel called me. Emily. Marcel. You understand what this report does? I understand what it documents, I said. I documented what was there. A pause. Benjamin Holloway asked me to extend his personal gratitude. He said, and I'm quoting him, "She's the most thorough person we've ever brought in." I thanked him and went back to my coffee. I have to stop here again, because if you're watching this and you've ever been dismissed, laughed at, talked over, made small by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with, I need you to know that your moment is coming too. The quiet ones always get the last word. Please subscribe. If this story is speaking to you, let me know in the comments. Your support keeps me going, and it reminds me why I keep telling this story. Stay with me. The best part is almost here. It was a Saturday morning, exactly 49 days after the dinner, when my phone rang. Holly. I was in my pajamas at my desk with my coffee, talking to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the plant, not the late justice, about whether I needed to take on a new client before January. I picked up on the second ring. Emily. Her voice was different, tight, like she'd been crying recently and was trying to sound like she hadn't. Hi, Holly. Can I come over? Are you home? I'm home. Come over. She was at my door 40 minutes later, which meant she'd already been in Manhattan, which meant she'd been thinking about coming before she called. She looked like herself, but with the edges blurred. Red around her eyes. Hair in a ponytail she'd clearly put up in a hurry. I let her in. I made her tea. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and waited. Randall is in trouble, she said. I see. There's something with his company, some investigation. He called me this morning and I've never heard him like that. He was scared, Emily. I looked at my tea. He said there was a report, a consultant's report that exposed he called it mischaracterized information. He said whoever wrote it was being vindictive. She looked up at me. Is it you? The room was very quiet. Holly, I said carefully, I can't discuss ongoing professional engagements. You know that. Her eyes filled. So it is you. I didn't say that. You didn't say it wasn't. I looked at my sister. I looked at her the way I had been looking at her our entire lives, with love that had no conditions, even when it should have. Holly, whatever happened with Randall's company happened because of what people at that company did, not because of me. I document what's there. That's the job. She wiped her eyes quickly, the way she does when she doesn't want to be seen crying. He said you probably had a personal grudge, that you were always weird at dinner. He said that to you? He said a consultant had it out for him. He didn't know it was you until... She stopped. Until what? Her jaw tightened. Until his lawyer pulled the disclosure document. There was a note about a personal connection to a stakeholder. It said indirect personal connection does not compromise objectivity. I nodded slowly. He figured it out from that, she said. He called me and he asked if my sister was a consultant, and I said, she closed her eyes. I said I didn't know what you did exactly, because I didn't, because none of us ever asked, because we just assumed. She couldn't finish the sentence. We both knew how it ended. Because we just assumed you were nothing. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Holly, I said gently, I need you to hear me. I did not write that report to hurt Randall. I wrote it because a client hired me to write an accurate assessment and I did my job. If Randall's situation is difficult right now, that is the result of decisions he made before I ever sat across from him at a dinner table. She looked at me for a long moment. What do you actually do? She asked. Really, tell me. So I told her. For the first time at 32 years old, I sat at my kitchen table in Manhattan, and explain to my sister what I actually did for a living, the firms I'd saved, the companies I'd restructured, the reports I'd written, the fees I charged. Her face, the way her face changed as I talked, is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not because it felt like triumph, because it felt like grief, because I watched her understand, slowly, that the sister she had dismissed for years had been someone entirely different from the person she'd allowed others to describe. When I finished, Holly was quiet for a long time. "Mom thinks you're between jobs," she finally said. "I know. Dad knows, doesn't he? Dad always knew. Dad never asked because he trusted me. There's a difference." She nodded, staring at the table. "I'm sorry, Emily." "I know you are." "No, her voice broke. "I let him talk to you like that. I sat there and I let him say those things and I didn't say a word and I should have. It doesn't matter what I thought you did. You're my sister. I should have said something." I looked at my sister's face, really looked at it. The way you look at someone you've loved your entire life even when they've failed you. And I felt something loosen in my chest, not completely, but enough. "Yes," I said, "you should have." "I'm sorry." "I believe you." We sat together for another hour. We didn't fix everything. You don't fix years of complicated family dynamics in a Saturday morning kitchen conversation. But something shifted. Something real and important. She left with her arms around me at the door, holding on for a moment longer than usual, and when she pulled back, her eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been when she arrived. My mother called me the following Wednesday. I had been waiting for this call. Marcel had told me the story was likely to appear in a financial trade publication. It did eventually, though my name was not in it, and I suspected the ripple effects would make their way to Queens eventually. "Emily," my mother said. Her voice had the particular quality it gets when she's performing composure over something that has rattled her significantly. "Holly tells me you've been working on something big." "I work on things regularly, Mom." A pause. She says she used the word prominent in your field." "I do reasonably well." "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I considered the question. I considered it sincerely, because my mother deserved a sincere answer even in moments when she hadn't deserved my grace. "I've told you I do consulting work since I started doing it," I said. "You never asked follow-up questions." Silence. "I suppose I assumed," she began. "I know what you assumed, Mom." Another silence. Longer. I could hear her breathing, the particular rhythm she gets when she's trying to find the right door into an apology without having to fully open it. "Randall is," she started. "Holly says things are very difficult with Randall." "I imagine they are." "He was rude to you at dinner. I should have said something." I sat with that for a moment. My mother, Leila Holloway, telling me she should have defended me. It was the closest thing to an admission I would ever get from her, and I knew it. "Yes," I said, "you should have." "I'm sorry, Emily." "I know, Mom." And I did know. My mother isn't a cruel woman. She's a woman who was raised to value a certain kind of visible success, the kind that comes with titles and external validation, and who never quite learned how to see the quieter kind. That's not an excuse, it's a context. I had spent years being angry at her for it. Sometime over those 47 days, the anger had tired itself out and left something quieter in its place. Not forgiveness, exactly, not yet, but the possibility of it. "Are you coming to Sunday dinner?" she asked. "Next Sunday," I said. "Yes, I'll come." "Good," she said, and then softer. "I'm proud of you. I should have said that more." I told her I loved her and I hung up the phone and I stood at my window looking out over the park for a long, long time. I want to take a moment for Stanley. My father called me the Thursday after my mother did, which surprised me because my father rarely calls. He texts, brief and warm, in the style of a man who has something to say but isn't sure language is equal to it. He called me at 7:30 in the morning. I picked up immediately. "Dad." "Hey, kid." His voice was the same as it always is, low, unhurried, the voice of a man who has decided not to waste words on anything that isn't worth them. You okay? I'm great, Dad. You? I'm good. A pause. I always knew, you know. I know you did. I looked you up years ago, found some of the work you'd done, the turnaround for that tech company in 2020, the one that got written up. He paused. Proud of you every day, Emily. I just don't always say it. My eyes burned in a way I hadn't let happen in years. I turned away from the window so I couldn't see my reflection in the glass. Thanks, Dad. That man at dinner was an idiot, he said simply. I should have said so. You were keeping the peace. Yeah, well, a quiet exhale. Peace isn't worth much if it costs you something. I should have remembered that. We talked for 20 more minutes, about nothing important, about everything real. His garden, my plants, whether I was eating enough, whether I ever thought about getting a dog. When we hung up, I sat in my apartment for a while and thought about the kind of love that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just sits steady in the corner of the room, watching you, believing in you, even when it doesn't always know how to say so. My father has loved me like that, my whole life. That morning, somehow, it finally landed. And now, Randall. I will tell you what happened to Randall briefly, because he doesn't deserve a large portion of this story. He was a chapter, not the book. The Road Capital Group restructuring was eventually completed successfully, which is to say the firm was partially acquired by a larger entity and reorganized. Several individuals, including Randall, faced regulatory review for their roles in the asset misclassification issue. Randall was not criminally charged. The willful blindness finding resulted in financial penalties and a regulatory restriction that limited his ability to operate as a primary investment manager for a period of time. His position in the reorganized firm was eliminated. He and Holly broke up approximately 3 weeks after the restructuring became public. She told me later, over a long dinner in the West Village, the first of many we would eventually have, that when things got difficult, Randall had become someone she didn't recognize. That the confidence she'd found so magnetic had turned brittle under pressure, and that under the brittle surface she'd found something small and frightened, and not particularly good. He called you a nobody, she told me that night, over pasta neither of us was really eating. Multiple times after the report came out, he kept saying you were a nobody with a grudge. What did you say? She met my eyes across the table. I said you were my sister, and that you were the best person at that dinner table. She paused, including me. I reached over and refilled her wine glass. You were at a hard place, I said. I was at the wrong place, she said. I'd like to be at the right one if you'll let me. I thought about the 2 a.m. floor in her Brooklyn apartment. The money I'd lent, the security deposit, the years of being underestimated, and the sister who had stood in the room while it happened. I'll let you, I said. It'll take a little time. I know, she nodded. I have time. Okay then. We finished dinner. We walked along the river for a while in the October cold, not talking much, just being 2 people who have the long, complicated history of sisters and who are figuring out what the next part of the story looks like. It wasn't fixed, it wasn't resolved, but it was real. That's more than I'd expected. People ask me sometimes, well, people will ask me after this video, I suppose, whether I regret any of it, whether I wish I'd spoken up at the dinner table instead of staying quiet, whether I should have told Randall who I was right then and watched his face change. Here is my honest answer. No. Not because I'm cold, not because I didn't feel what happened at that dinner. I felt it in a way that vibrated in my chest for days afterward. I felt the dismissal and the silence and the way my family sat and let a stranger decide what I was worth. I felt all of it. But I've learned, through the kind of work I do, through years of watching companies fail not from external threats, but from internal chaos, that the most powerful moves are never the reactive ones. Reaction is noise. Accuracy is signal. I am in the business of signal. What Randall discovered was not revenge, it was consequence. He didn't suffer because I orchestrated something against him. He suffered because of a pattern of choices he made over years, and because when those choices finally required accounting, the person doing the accounting happened to be someone he'd already dismissed. The universe has a dry sense of humor. What my family discovered was not a revelation I staged for effect. It was simply who I had been the entire time, becoming visible. People see what they expect to see. When you stop performing smallness to make others comfortable, sometimes the simple act of being yourself is the most disorienting thing you can offer. My mother and I are still working on things, that's honest. She is a woman with decades of patterns, and I am a woman with decades of wounds from those patterns, and neither of us undoes that in a few phone calls. But we are trying in the halting, imperfect way that trying actually looks like. My father and I text almost every morning now. Brief, warm, in the style of a man whose love has always been there, just waiting to be named. Holly and I are finding our way. It is slow and sometimes awkward, and sometimes we sit in silence over dinner in the West Village, and I can tell she's thinking about that dinner in Queens and feeling the weight of it. I let her feel it. I don't rescue her from it. That's its own kind of love, I think. The kind that lets someone sit with what they've done long enough to actually change. And me? I am 32 years old. I live on the Upper West Side, 14 floors up, with a window that looks out over the park. I drink my coffee black. I have 3 plants named after Supreme Court justices. I do work that matters, quietly, for people who need it, and I charge what I'm worth, and I do not apologize for either of those things. I am not unemployed. I am, as it turns out, the most employed person at that dinner table ever was. Randall found that out the hard way. Everyone else found out the quiet way. And I found out something too. Something I didn't expect this story to give me. I found out that the loneliest part of keeping yourself private isn't the privacy itself, it's the distance it creates between you and the people you love. Holly knowing me, actually knowing me, changes something. My father naming his pride changes something. Even my mother's awkward half-opened apology changes something. I had protected myself so completely that I had forgotten that protection, taken too far, is just a different kind of loneliness. I'm working on that. We all are. There's a Sunday dinner coming up next week, Queens. My mother's good dishes probably. Maybe flowers again. I'm going. Holly's coming. Just the family this time. No performances, no auditions, no strangers with practiced handshakes, trying to be the most impressive person in the room. Just us. The complicated, imperfect, genuinely trying Holloways of Queens, New York. I'm bringing wine. The good kind because I can, and because some gestures are worth making. My father will hug me at the door and tell me I look tired, and I will tell him I'm fine, and we will both know I mean it this time. And somewhere across town, in whatever remains of the life he built on the assumption that quiet people can be safely dismissed, Randall will be learning the lesson that I never needed to teach him out loud. Never underestimate the person who doesn't feel the need to explain themselves to you. The quietest ones always have the longest receipts. As you made it all the way here, if you watched this entire story unfold, then I need you to know something. You showing up for this, staying through every part of it, means more than you can imagine. For everyone who has ever sat at a table and been made to feel small, for everyone who has ever held their worth quietly while the room failed to see it, this was for you. Please subscribe, not for an algorithm, for community. Because the people who understand this story deserve to find each other. Because if you've ever been underestimated, you deserve a space where someone finally says, I see you, I know what you carry, and I know what you're capable of. ALA point. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below telling me about a time you were underestimated and what happened next. I read every single one. And remember, the quiet ones, we're always taking notes. Until next time.